Who would have thought that being in this playoff pool would have offered an actual more exciting experience than the Super Bowl game itself? Now, maybe you're someone who loves to surround themselves with snacks, watch the commercials, engage in all the craziness, in which case there was a little bit of that for you to deal with. But in terms of actual football, there wasn't a whole lot to cheer for, unless you're one of the fortunate few that cared about this game because it did come down to this game. Is how the top four within our pool ended up being there. So let's talk about the game first, then we'll get to those top four who'll be taking home some cash. Technically, it's a three. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Within this pool, there's people that probably watch this game in the more standard way as they're based out in North America, but we definitely have a huge contingent in Europe, and then obviously a lot here in the time zone I'm in, where we woke up early in the morning to try and watch this thing. Now, full disclosure, I actually slept in and watched it on delay, which I had no problem with, because jumping ahead 10 seconds every once in a while on the feed wasn't the worst thing in the world. And if you watch the game, you know absolutely why. But I think even more so this year, what kind of came into focus for me, and this is something more that I'm talking with other people who've lived out here for quite some time. The nice thing is not being in North America during football season is actually kind of an advantage. Their games happen at so many different times that you can catch most of them anyway. Obviously, you miss some of them, and in Europe, I watched more of the 1 o'clock games as opposed to now when the night games are a lot easier for me to watch. But not the watching games part, it's having to listen to all of the other stuff. You can actually escape all of that out here and only read or watch or engage in the content that you actually want to. And in which case, the Super Bowl week is actually kind of a positive experience. You don't have to deal with it, because already just on my feed, the amount of people who are screaming and yelling on TV, I just don't have to listen to them. So I'm sorry if you're in North America and you've had to deal with all the overreactions. It became pretty clear, though, if you thought going into this game that Mahomes was not the GOAT, which is one of the dumbest arguments I have no patience for. Essentially what it just says is, what generation do you like the most? Now defend the best person in that, particular age group. But it's now Brady, Mahomes. Brady beat Mahomes. Now Brady's commenting on a Mahomes game. Look, if you already didn't like Mahomes and he gives you a million reasons as to why not, then that game was actually probably pretty fun to watch. And it just justified that he is not, in fact, a flawless human being that can win regardless of who's around him. If you love Mahomes and that was tough to watch, the fact that he's now 17-4 in the playoffs does not really mean for you that this is an argument that is now done and dusted. It's just the overreactions. I think the crazy thing, though, was I did think that the Eagles' run might be stopped and that the Chiefs might say it's up to Hurts to beat us. And they absolutely did. Obviously, it was a crazy, not just obviously the offense, but with the lack of offense, the Chiefs' defense did get exposed. Now, I still think they're a better defense, and they were just on the field a bit too much. But it's true. Mahomes, if it comes out that Mahomes needs surgery or that he actually did get wrecked early on one of those hits, it wouldn't shock me, because he just looked like a fraction of himself. And, I mean, all the stats have already been out there. I'm not telling you something you don't already know. The fact that the Eagles didn't even have to blitz to get that kind of pressure on him, and he just looked helpless and not scared, but certainly not confident. He was throwing behind receivers at their feet. He just didn't have the mobility or the structure to really get through any of that kind of pressure, and they just got manhandled. And kind of outcoached when the coaching was supposed to go the other way, because there wasn't really anything that they did to adapt to anything that was going on. But if you watch the game, you're already probably tired of that. I think that was kind of the nice thing about being on the delay. You got to really engage with some of the stuff you like. If you like the halftime show, and if you're a fan of Kendrick Lamar, then you probably did, because he really did a great job of putting everything that is him into one small chunk where everything meant something and there was a lot to read into. If you prefer the halftime shows that are just insert older band that brings in a ton of people and just plays kind of a Spotify playlist of certain generation rock hits, then you probably didn't. But that was kind of the show itself, Right now, even coming out, the people shocked that Taylor Swift got booed. And then apparently, if you look at the actual feed and not the Fox feed, Trump got booed as well. It became a political back and forth, which I'm kind of okay right now with football not being that. So while I always miss the Sundays, and I'm definitely going to miss fantasy sports in general well for a couple weeks until March Madness kicks in. And let's be honest, I won't miss anything ever because that'll be amazing. I actually am okay taking a break from football right now. I don't really need everything to matter. Although I will say the fact that, the country itself is almost saying goodbye to football as they know it, not knowing what the country's going to be like in 6 to 8 months. I think that speaks volume for itself. Either way, definitely was an enjoyable pool experience, much more than, like I said in the intro, a game experience. And the reason why, once the game got out of control and then Kansas City finally hit some deep shots, well, that did decide the pool. So there was definitely some people, myself included, who were pretty pumped to see it. So let's get to why and who is taking home the money, because that's what we're really all tuning in for, aren't we? I started at the bottom on purpose just to get a little bit of suspense, although you already have access to this. You already know. Now, the bummer here, Kent, I am so sorry, buddy. You almost went coast to coast, leading from week one. You just couldn't hang on. You only had a couple players, and unfortunately, they weren't unique ones. They're ones that a lot of people did, the Barkley and the Hurtses of the world. So as soon as we knew that Brown started to have a game, you started to slowly slip. You were probably just hoping, can I crack the top 5 just to say top 5, or could I crack the top 4 so I can walk with a little bit of cash? Obviously, you didn't. Nick took you down by 1, but Nick's obviously someone who was looking to see how many players did he have left. Chainer, I'm sorry, buddy. This is the weird one, but you are the odd person out. You are one off doubling your cash. I'm sorry, man. I was cheering for you in that regard. But now let's go into our top 4 now. Jim Slade the second, you're going to see a little bit of greed on his part. He took it by 2 points here, obviously having some unique players and someone who could jump up. We had, I think a lot of people probably expected second for the last 2 rounds, slowly budgeting up here, held on by 1 point to number 3. We got Jim actually made another run. So for those who didn't know, he did save his quarterback sub to the very end and then put in Mahomes just before the Super Bowl. It was a great call. He was definitely someone who was waiting for those 2 touchdowns, well, 3 total, I guess, at the end. That was pretty key for him because if you just kept the first half stats and doubled them, he wouldn't have been here. But then number 1, my dogs again, second year in a row. We're talking Chiefs dynasties. We should have been talking about dog dynasties, apparently, by 5 points. Why? They had 6 players coming into the Super Bowl. They had the 3 Eagles that a lot of people in the top 5 ended up having, the Brown, Barkley, Hurts combo. But earlier on, they already had Mahomes. They made that sub a little bit ago. They had Kelsey and Worthy since the beginning. Now, Kelsey was not the reason why they came out on top, but those 2 touchdowns to Worthy 1,000% were. If that last 50-yard touchdown isn't to Worthy, but just to pretty much anybody else, well, save Kelsey, obviously. My dogs do not defend their title, and Jim is walking away with an even more paycheck. But that's not what happened. My dogs are smiling. Literally, they're lying around me smiling, looking for the extra treats that this pool, apparently the last 2 years, helps to provide them. Although, Jim, you're not going away too much. You get double the prize money here, so well done there. And the gentleman of the KAK here, CAC, I'm assuming that's how we call it. I'm just going with that. Congratulations, your first year in the pool, and you walk away with a little bit of cash. So I've already been in touch with you folks. We're sorting that one out. And like I said, for anyone that still owes me a bit, I'll be talking to you. I'll wrap that up at the end of this video. Just because I know I like my stats, so I don't know if you do too. So who were the people that you would have wanted to have picked? It looks like the best combo might have ended up being if you would have taken Hurts and Daniels all the way through and then at the last minute jumped into Mahomes. That probably would have maxed out your points, which is not what you would have assumed. Obviously, Lamar would have been a better bet had he gotten more than 2 rounds. And Allen was always pretty good, but that, the 19, the divisional round, he never really was like the number one. Obviously, his second in week 1 was a strong start. But you got to kind of balance it out through the whole playoff run. So who would have known that would have been the one to take? Now, there was a clear number 1. If you didn't have Barkley, you weren't in contention, and that was just fairly clear, more than doubling everybody else. But what's funny here is Cook, Henry, Saquon, and Gibbs were by far the most common 4. In fact, most people had that. Mixon over Gibbs would have been the only one just because he lasted 2 weeks, but not too many people went that way. No one had Brian Robinson. I just like to put them in there to see, who would have actually scored, but the differences of those points were pretty negligible. In terms of wide receiver, that's where things really, really opened up. Worthy was actually worthy of your number one pick. Just ask my dogs, because that's what got them there. McLovin at number 2 was obviously a surprise, but the fact that Washington went so far had a lot to do with that. A.J. Brown, who started off looking to be the biggest bust of the whole pool, ended up being obviously a really good value pick and one that a lot of people did have. You kind of needed to be in contention at the end, but you're really banking on them going the long run. Goddard being the highest, I did skip Nico Collins just because he went just the 2 rounds. A few people already had him. Goddard is the highest that nobody had. So that would have been someone to factor in with the same number of points as Nico. So obviously his per game was much lower. And he didn't have a great finals because he didn't need one. But there you are with McConkey, Brown, Smith. These are people that, at least if you're getting over 20 with a receiver. But I do think it does stand to notice that the 2 that were, we can say McLovin almost a 40, Worthy with a 45. They're clearly the ones you wanted to focus on. And each of them only had 3 of 4. There was no full coast-to-coast receiver that really blew this pool away, with obviously, like I said, AJ being the highest one there. So there you go. If you want to try and study some stats for next year, it's not going to help you. My dogs don't study stats, and they do just fine. Well, that's it. This is the last video of this particular series because obviously the playoff pool is over. I'll put this in the notes in the email, knowing not everyone watches. And even if you do, maybe you don't make it all this way. Or you've put me on 2.0 speed. Good for you. I probably sound like a chipmunk right now. Hope you're getting a good laugh out of that. But you might miss some of the content. So I will send, if you owe me money, I'm going to send it along. Please do remember, my preference is only 1 transfer per year. So if you are someone that was in a pool before, or even more importantly, most of you seem to want to sign up for the big one coming up in about a month and a half in March, just tell me. I check you off my list. I actually prefer it because then it's just 1 transfer. We don't need to actually contribute to some of these online apps and or baking bits. So that's my 2 cents. Either way, if you have any questions, as always, let me know. Hopefully you enjoyed this pool, even a fraction as much as I did. I'll probably see you again about this time next year.